Kyle Jones. We are here today with the Fullness of Meaning Ministries to convey over to you a solid idea of a biblical theme, a world theme, a theocentric theme, where we gather together extant or things, particulars outside of the Bible, particulars of information, and bring them back to the table to make clear that all things do point to this Christ figure that we do find in the Gospels of the New Testament in the Bible. So today we are going to cover, in our Fullness of Meaning Ministries, the Meander and Chevron. Okay, so the Meander and Chevron is a book I've been working on for some time, and it reaches back prior to the Sumerian and the biblical Eden or Aden. I'm going to write this term out for you. I was talking to my friend Brandon, who is my engineer and pretty much my guy who keeps me afloat here, about this concept, Meander and Chevron, that I have to reference kind of my own work when I'm referencing anything here, but I'm also referencing a million other authors. But this is a book that you will find hopefully on market within the next year, called Meander and Chevron. Let me explain. Meander is a symbol, what we call an abstract, and I'm going to go ahead and put the dates down, roughly circa around 100,000 BC to roughly, I want to say around 4,000 BC. We had an age I would call of innocence. There was no law broken. There was no fruit taken or partaken of that God told Adam and Eve to not do. There was an age of simplicity, an age of consciousness, an age of particulars, as I would say, things that you would look at something and you would denote that thing to the best of your ability by, say, a squiggly line or whatever. Now, this era is an era of contention with many Christians and many Jews as to, so we evolved, so we were cavemen before, and people argue that did Adam and Eve exist? Were they the first of the humankind? All of these questions are going to be answered in the book and the Fullness of Meaning of Meander and Chevron. But there is ample enough evidence to show of earlier Baltic cultures that some scholars would call the goddess-styled culture. Goddess to these people in that world, that time, did not mean what we say. We have more or less paganized it, and I use the word pagan from our contemporary term as being something evil in the Judaistic Christian world and Islamic world. A lot of iconoclasms and a lot of the polemics we see today by the Islamic religion, the Wahhabists, who and the Sharia, as they want to practice Wahhabism, and also the interest groups such as ISIS are destroying many of the artifacts, as well as just great history that could give notion to something other than the history germane to Judaism and Islam and Christianity. So this era is historical. We do have findings of what we call abstractions from the Baltic goddesses of 40,000 BC in particular, and all the way down to probably the Starchevo, past that, but Starchevo and Vinča cultures. We could say roughly 7,500 BC, what we would call modern day Serbia, around the area of the capital city Belgrade. So, if I could for a moment give you what I would call an abstraction, something like this right here, it is it's a sound, something guttural, as we believe we can reconstruct, of a group of people that did use this sign in the Vinca or the Starcevo culture. Again, roughly in what we would say Belgrade, Serbia. This sign does mean water. Now, we're talking 7500 BC. This is way later. This is not even old. To roughly 5500 BC. I think that was kind of the apex of this culture, but it didn't just die off instantly. It continued. So this mark did have something of a sound, like we would say the ma. And it's interesting that we do have in our Hebrew mayim. Mayim, the root ma, meaning water. We have it in the Arabic as well. And we do have it, if I believe, in the archaic Chinese. So we do have the sounds ma for meaning water. Now, the root of what I believe did evolve into the languages of Arabic and Hebrew. So this sound is what we, and this character would be what we would call an abstraction. Now, there's another sense to language that we would not call this, and I want to define what this is by what it is not. If I said to you, let's say the word jing. I'm trying to think of this is Chinese. Oops, blew that one. Still blew it, but that's okay. And something like this. And then we have something like this. I'm trying to get this one right. And something like this. That's the word jing. And it means spirit. In a sense, it can be bad or good. Interesting, the word jinn in Arabic, I'll write it in Arabic, see if I can still do this. Jinn, I think so, use a yod. Jinn, but jinn would be a devil or a spirit in Arabic. And we could say jinn. You still have your compression there. Jinn, jing. Probably coming out of the same word, but it does mean a spirit. And it can mean good or bad. Kind of like the Greeks. They have the genius. The jinns, in a sense, there's a genius to something. They can also be what they could call a kakodemon, which means a bad spirit. Daemon, I'm sorry, I'm running out of space over here. The kakodemon was an evil spirit, or the kalos daemon. Kalos meaning the good demon. I can just put repeat, demon. So there is a ja, na, there's your genius. Ja, na, ja, na. That can be nasal and dropped out, omitted. There's possible a root historically, philologically to these words, but nonetheless, this pictogram is Chinese, early Chinese, and if I could for a moment bypass what I consider to be pictures within the pictogram. These are more or less the radicals that make up each line the entire pictogram or pictogram. So the old world of the Baltics, roughly in Finland, Estonia, you have again, signs with sounds that mean something. They reference something. And somewhat we could call it the semen, and I'm using this in a very technical sense. The semen, it just means to signal. We get the word semiotics from this, semiotics. And it means that which is in a state of coherency with particulars that lead to points of information and conversation. In the Baltic region, all the way to the Vinca culture and even past that into Romania, the signs, the abstractions became more complex. They evolved. There was a sense of evolution to the meaning of language, where the words took on a more fullness of meaning to signify a greater story. Now I want to put down story within this, because this is what the Meander and Chevron is all about, the story and the semiotics of it. This right here was some form of reference to the God at some idea of heaven, earth, and sea, and its station. Now, there's an argumentation about what these things meant in the Shah dynasty. But we do know that the main character within this pictogram was this God-like character. Now, we do have in Akkadian, but Akkadian language as cuneiform language, pictograms and radicals and sounds that were comprised and used for Sumerian language. This is a Sumerian word, and it is called Digir, which is the name of the shape of this pictogram and not the phoneme like this. But nonetheless, the Digir meant the God. Now, as we have one aspect of the Spirit, the Great Spirit, we also have three parts to it. And we could go back to, say, 2200 BC and find this radical on tortoise shells, carved in tortoise shells in early archaic Shah dynasty China. Here, this is Sumerian and Akkadian, Digir. This precedes that by at least a good 1,000 years. And I say a lot, I say older than that, but at least 1,000 years. But I'm going to say I'll even make it 3000 BC. There's your main God and its constituents. There's your Trinity. The older you go back, the more you see the identity to what was first seen and conveyed. There was no other argument within the semiotics of what it meant. It was what it was. They established it. There's your Trinity, and there's your Trinity. These are radicals that comprise the pictogram. These are radicals that comprise the total picture, the pictogram. Now, when we go back to the earlier state, again, of this goddess culture, which I consider the Age of Innocence, this is the events or the event that took place before the fall, that we do have an account, I believe, in the text of Inanna. We do have an account of the fall from the state of, from the chapters of Genesis, chapter 3. Some people would argue that it was not the fall at all in Inanna, that she was enlightened and she was educated at the point that she could see both good and evil. But we, from a Christian standpoint and a Judaistic standpoint, look at the text of Genesis as when Eve and Adam took of the fruit, and I'll say euphemistically for now, the fruit, they could see both good and evil. They became judges. As Jesus called the Pharisees, you are little Eli, or Eli, you're little gods, you're magistrates. You now have appointed yourself to say what is good and what is bad, where you really don't understand the context of God the Father's ultimate plan. So this ministry holds to view that the texts of Inanna do account for the fall. And we do also account for the fall in Genesis chapter 3. But I'm going to make this a little bit quicker. I'm going to pick up the tempo. Meander, as we call it, the water, were signs like this, but they continued. Now, I'm not going to go into this, but the Babylonian gods of Tiamat, Leviathan, that are mentioned in the Bible. Leviathan, this one is. And what was the other one real quickly? Leviathan and I'm losing it here, but Tiamat, Leviathan, they were great serpents that border-hemmed the countries, Greece and Israel, Canaan at the time, of course, and the land was here. They always believed that the early myth was that the serpent swam with the ocean around the border hem of the land. And I won't get into the philosophy of sin and falling out off the earth and etc., but there is a type of Abaddon, a type of hell, a type of jurisdiction that this great sea serpent held. And the idea that the motion of serpent was within this was understood. And I think that these Babylonian ideas were simply a carryover from an older sense of Meander. Now, when I say goddess culture, I'm referencing the Baltic cultures. I'm referencing the old European world. I'm referencing an age of innocence and a time of using abstractions, not radicals, to bring up to a pictogram to have a complete, coherent system of semiotics. We have an evolution. Now, I'm going to stick with this one a second. We have an evolution that goes to semiotics. Now, we can study the word semiotics by the great professor in Italy, Milan, Italy, Umberto Eco. And if you look up his name, you'll see all kinds of wonderful treatments on semiotics. I don't have time to go into that too far. But nonetheless, Umberto Eco is probably the leading scholar on the study of semiotics. The meander was seen carved into bone. And these other patterns, called the chevron, were seen carved into the bone. Now, I'm making probably a big mess of the artwork that was created some 40,000 years ago. But the meander was considered to be the snake, or the serpent force. The chevron was somehow denoted as being a border hem or a corner, and I could probably reverse these chevrons to show that they were simply in conjunction with the serpent force. And then we had longer abstractions, just simply we call them the V's, which is a symbol of the woman's reproductive system. Okay? Now I want you to keep this in mind and try to hold all this together. The abstractions were simply noted because this more simplistic, in one sense, culture knew to simply denote the meaning of their society by border hems where the serpent either is kept out or in, and the woman's reproductive system where the meander or the serpent never penetrated or went through. Now, these signs and symbols went away once the fall took place. Now, you have a time and an era where you still see some of the symbols, but when the fullness of meaning came to be, and the story of Adam and Eve and the fall, which I still to this day teach that it was the sexual congress that took place between Eve and the serpent, or Inanna and the Korabai, or Enki and Inanna. I believe that this Meander did penetrate the woman's symbol, and there was break in what we call natura, or the natural state of balance. Now, did people get together and write a good story? No. I believe that this is God himself giving us the particulars, these abstractions from such a long time ago, that in the fullness of time, when pure semiotics could come to be, the fullness of meaning, the referential system of consciousness, where I believe it began with Adam and Eve, where God, through his tselem, or his image, did bara Adam and Eve. He gave them the intelligence of himself. As to how that they were born and made, we could take it simply that they were brought out from the dust, as the Bible says, if we look at the English, that God made them from the dust. In the Hebrew, I believe it conveys the same. At the same time, the higher notion is that Adam and Eve were the first of their kind to have the intelligence of God. And in that, I believe that semiotics, the coherency of language and story, the story, is conveyed at the beginning, right here, at Eden, or Adin, at the Gamda Eden in the Hebrew, or the border-hemmed place where serpent and Eve were. That story was not told within these signs yet. They were a simple culture called the goddess culture. Now, I won't go into too much of how they dressed, but the keepers of the temples, or the houses where they kept their ancestors' relics as the worship goddesses and gods, the women would dress, as Dr. Maria Gimbuta said, as birds or bird-like creatures, in order to keep a semblance of what they were as nesting the house. Now, as I've said in some of my micro lectures talking about the Korabai and the cherubim, the bird-like angels, it might be a draw on that when the cherubim or the Korabai fulfilled the meaning of a lot older sense. Everything is an evolution to Logos, in Logos, from Logos to its fullness. Just as in the Big Bang, when it happened, we had hot gases. Everyone would say that's chaos. But when they cooled down, the hot gases, they formed planets, stars, order, time, mass. E equals mc squared. There's order. How did order arrive? It's always been. It's been Logos, the name for Christ, the ordered system. Likewise, these were like the hot gases that in the fullness of time came to be to make a more perfect story, or the story. So if you will, I'll bypass this right now, and I want to explain just for a moment before we wrap this up. I'm going to make this a shorter lecture. I'm kind of writing slightly off the cuff. Well, I've been working on this story for some time. I want to make it clear what I just said. When I say the story, people have said the story, but I mean the story. The Greek, hysterein. That's hysterein. Did I do it right? I think that's right. Nominative, singular, something like that. It means the inquiry. The inquiry. The questions answered. Or the questions. The inquiry. The questions. Or the question. What does it all mean? What does it mean? What does life mean? Why am I here? Not what, but why. The abstractions are the whatnesses. The whyness is within the story that God has given us in the Bible. They're particulars. they're like radicals that have come together to make the pictogram. But the inquiry, the story, is answered. And I believe it's in the Bible. So the story takes all of the whatness and puts it into the answer for the why. Why are we here? All of these particulars, abstractions that connote something. We come to the pictographic cultures. Let me just write out roughly 100,000 BC to roughly 4,000 BC. To roughly, the phonemes began probably well, the characters, the cuneiform, to used to be accounting for taxes and population, etc. But then we get into, I'll just say not the phonemes, but yes, the phonemes, the characters, the alphabet itself. Matter of fact, if you want to get into a deep study of what I'm discussing, Dr. Mark Elaine Quachneen, who wrote a book called The Mysteries of the Alphabet. It sounds very mysterious New Age. It's not. It's a very scholarly treatment by a Jewish teacher, a master of Hebrew, who did cover Indus Valley script, Sumerian script, Akkadian, and he discusses somewhat of what I'm talking about here, but he does it in a very technical format, and you can get all your answers you need to out of that book. But the pictograph cultures. Then we come on down to Phoenician. I don't know how to spell this one right now. It's all about transliteration, how you want to say it. But Phoenician, let's just say, 2000 BC. Earlier, we get into characters, a higher level of usage of characters, such as the alphabet, the Phoenician alphabet, alphabet, aleph, bait, the letters, and as we've discussed before, where the pictograms led into that, we have like this right here is kind of like it's the letter Sheen. Now it was created to sound. It's the same sound, but it was created to more of a wedge shape. This is not even a good sheen here. But it initially meant the biting or the piercing of teeth. Biting of teeth. I'll just put biting for it now. If you look up, like, say the word bait, I believe it's like, I want to say it's like that. It just means a house. Bait. But as time went on, they kind of turned it over, and it became like this. It's the B sound. But initially, bait, is that right? Yes, that's it. That's the house. And it means that which is contained in a house. So bait, and by the way, the letter bait, B, ba, is the first letter in the word for the word house. And it is called bait, or baith. So Hebrew language, early Hebrew language, is probably your best bet to study when you want to see the translation or the change, the morphology from pictographic cultures to phonemes, just sounds without meaning. And I believe that the fuller meaning was retained in the pictographic societies, where the pictures meant the story. And you couldn't change that. When you said something in pictographic form, you couldn't wiggle around and say, well, I meant something else. The pictographic form was full. It had the fullness of meaning in its semiotic nature in and of and by itself. You could not play. You could not have double entendre. It was a picture, and that's what it is. So we really have that. Abstractions, 100,000 BC, all the way down to pictographic cultures, roughly 4,000 BC, all the way down to Phoenician, something phonetic, where it kind of started to lose its meaning through cuneiform, from the wedge shape, or by the wedge-shaped characters or letters. And from that point, we can go on down to the Greek alphabet, and that's what we get our alphabet from. Alphabet, aleph, bait. So That's that. And so in the fullness of time, what we're saying for the story is that these abstractions, what I say, has always been in the sense of logos, but in the sense of the Father's will. Everything is ordained within His love, His marriage for us, His gamos. And within that marital right that I call the joining, or the GM, the gamos, the wedding, the joining, the marriage that our Heavenly Father has created for us. It does mean marriage. I'm going to keep on writing upside down. See how good I am by doing that. I don't know. So I've lost it. And upside down. There you go. Marriage. But within this, we do have a predeterminate, what I would call predestination. It means an ultimate plan before it ever happened. All these are by the Father. Father and Father. But within this, sealed within the love affair that the Father has established to happen and to evolve, and under His more, I don't want to say more calculative sense, but more of the calculus, more of the in-brain theorem, more of the physics of it all, I believe that logos abides, and that is the Greek word for orderly arrangement in a sense, but ordered system. It means the fullness of collection of meaning by Homer's terms. But when it came to Christ in the Gospels, John used logos in the fullness of its meaning. It meant that thing that needs no other, the thing that orders all things and guides us directly and loves us and fully accounts for everything in the fullness of meaning. And it is in this logos that these abstractions, the abstractions of these early Baltic goddess cultures and the pictographic cultures came into. And when they met the gospel and the words of Jesus Christ, they met their match. And past the Gospels, I believe, it is my belief, that we have created a great philosophy, the ultimate philosophy on earth, the embellished Greek philosophy by even Paul himself and thinkers such as Ignatius and Irenaeus. They took the Gospels and Greek philosophy, and there's a great study on Warren Yeager, I believe, called Paideia. How do you teach the Greeks in their youth? The pediatrics, if you will, the Paideia, the little steps, the footers, if you will, the podos, the feet, podos, Paideia. The Paideia idea was fulfilled within the Christian culture, which was not stationed at Greece or Rome or Israel or Old Canaan, whatever, Palestine. It simply was its own culture. And it was that was the problem, as Dr. Yeager says, that the Christians actually embellished upon Paideia thought. The Romans wanted to take Greek thought and make it their own type of trivium, their own type of educatorial system. And the Romans did see that the Christian philosophers were leading to a higher level of reasoning. But the problem was the Christians would not adhere to Roman law and be as the Romans were. And that was the problem. It was not the fact that the Christians were ignorant. They were the most intelligent people. By the 1st century, even 2nd century AD, the highest thinkers were the Christians. I don't say that because I believe that because I'm a Christian. I believe you can read that for yourself and see that. Prior to the councils of Nicaea by Constantine. That's when it started to end. But nonetheless, the ultimate fullness of meaning, I believe, was met with the Gospels. And I think that these ultimate abstractions of Trinity, of serpent, of garden, of Eve, of woman, of penetration, I believe that we've met our match with the new patriarchal system of grace. Not patriarchal system of law. I believe the patriarchal system of law of the Old Testament was shadow, sketch, and type of things to come in their ultimate fulfillment, that we would have grace. But the law was necessary to pull people out of paganism itself. People condemn the patriarchs in the Old Testament, but they were nothing more than shepherders. They were shepherds. They were people that were practicing polygamy. They were people that were offering their children to the sun god. God was pulling these murderous, robbing, thieving type people out of a system that mistreated the women. And they brought them under the rally of law that said, do not mistreat the woman. Do not rob. Do not kill. Do not steal. And so whenever you see these accounts of the patriarchs living in sin, doing something wrong, mistreating somebody, it was the pagan custom. And God was pulling them out. There's a great treatment on this called Missing Identities by Dr. Phyllis Bird, who wrote about the women, the studies of the women in the Old Testament. And she showed that the women were more greatly treated on a higher level under patriarchal Judaistic law than they were in the pagan surrounding territory. So we need to get past that was a barbarous culture. They were a barbarous culture, but God is not a barbarous culture. And he's not a barbarous God. But when we finally come down to the ultimate idea of grace in Logos, these abstractions, these radicals, these pictographic societies had met their match. And I believe for today I'm going to end that with this idea. Next week we'll probably go to a more particular study of the Greek god, the Baltic goddesses, what they were called, maybe a little bit deeper idea of the Persephone myth, etc. But today I just want to give you an idea, an overlay of what I think will be a lifetime treatment for Meander and Chevron. But this would answer for evolution. This would answer for an age prior to Adam and Eve. It would bring together and rally the fullness of meaning from the dawn of time to present day is what all things mean under Logos. Well, thank you very much. I'm Kyle Jones with the Fullness of Meaning Christian Ministries.